This week on Q&A, George Mason University economics professor and syndicated columnist Walter Williams.
Dr. Walter Williams, I want to try some word association and to get you to talk about people in your life. Start with Rush Limbaugh.
Well, a lot of people ask me, how did Rush Limbaugh call me to substitute for a show? And so I tell them, well, Rush was looking in the mirror and he wanted to take a vacation, so he said, who is the second best talk show host in the world? I kind of joke about that. No, but actually what happened is that Bob Dorning, Congressman Bob Dorning, used to fill in for him, and he was interviewing me on the air. And a lot of times when I'm being interviewed on radio, on the air, I take over the show, and they just kind of liked it. And and so Rush called me and said, would you want to host my show? I'm going out for a couple of days. And I said, I never hosted a show in my life. And so he says, it's easy. My people show you what to do. And so that was in October 1992, and I've been doing it off and on since then.
What does it do for you?
Well, it's my big classroom. I love talking to people. I love trying to explain economics to people, and I think that the combination of a talk show, of doing talk show, and also writing a syndicated column, I get a lot of feedback from my fellow Americans, and people will write or they'll call in and say, well, did you think of this, or you're wrong about that? And so it causes me to get more information than the average person would have, and so I've benefited immensely from my exposure to talk show and television and writing a syndicated column.
How powerful is that show?
Well, I mean, I think it's the biggest talk show in the history of radio anywhere in the world, and 20 million people a week, and so I think it's very, very significant. And I think that what it does, talk radio in general, has ended the monopoly by the major media. That is, you have different ideas coming in and challenging the conventional wisdom. I think that's very, very powerful for the American people.
Next name, Bill Cosby.
Bill Cosby, that's a funny one. When I was young, and I was living in the Richard Allen housing project in North Philadelphia, and my mother used to say to me, see that boy out there, he's silly and he's foolish and he's never going to get anywhere. And she was referring to Bill Cosby. We grew up in the same neighborhood in North Philadelphia. And Mom was right about most things, but she was wrong about that.
How well do you know him?
I knew him fairly well as a kid, and I haven't seen him in years. We served on the board of trustees of Temple University together. And I guess that was about the mid-'80s, and I have not seen him since. And by the way, some of the people that he talks about on the show, like Weird Harold and Fat Albert, they were really guys in the neighborhood.
Julius Erving, Dr. J.
Well, Dr. J, I've only seen him once. Well, I've seen him many times on television, but he's a second cousin of mine, and of course I don't play basketball as well as he does.
So as a second cousin, you don't really have a relationship with him?
No, I found out about him is after my father died. He's a second cousin on my father's side of the family, and I guess one of my second aunts called and she said, well, do you know you have a very, very famous cousin? And that's how I found out about that we were related.
What were your parents like?
Well, my mother and father, they got separated, and then they ultimately got divorced in around, I guess, 1948 or 1950. And I saw very, very little of my father growing up. But my mother was a mother and father. She was very, very demanding. And she was the kind of woman that even though we were poor, she used to say, look, we have a beer pocketbook, but we have champagne taste. And she was always expecting us to do the best, although I disappointed her a number of times by not doing the best. She had to come to school to talk to principals or teachers about me on numerous occasions.
When did you think you might become a professor, a columnist, a public figure?
It's nothing that I planned. When I was when I graduated from California State University with a BA, I had planned to, work for a bank or something like that. And it turned out that my father's third wife, she was a member of a sorority, and they were, her sorority and Seagram's Gin, they were holding an essay contest for scholarships, and the essay contest, it was decided at UCLA. That is, it was judged by professors at UCLA, and I wrote an essay, and I got. I think I came in third or fourth place, and I was very, very disappointed. But the dean one of the deans at UCLA said, he ran down the hallway. He said, don't go away disappointed. He says, the tuition is not that much, so why don't you apply to UCLA's graduate school? And I applied, and I was accepted. And I think my second or third year at UCLA, I got a job at Los Angeles City College, a part-time job, and then teaching in the evening. And I loved teaching so much, I said, well, this is going to be my life. Now, as to being a columnist, being a public figure, that was not in my plans at all.
How did the column start?
Well, the column started I wrote for the Philadelphia Tribune. There was this, it's a black, one very, very old black newspaper in Philadelphia, and it turned out that the president of the Philadelphia Tribune, he contacted me and he said, well, I want to change the focus of the newspaper a little bit. I want some economics in it. And so he hired me to write a column once a week, and then I was discovered as it was in 1980 when the Heritage Foundation was starting a syndicated column, and they invited me to be on their syndicate. And a fellow, Ed Grimsley, he was the editorial page editor of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and he said that he just loved the columns, but he says nobody's reading it. You ought to really accept this syndication, and if you write a column, we will carry it. And the Richmond Times-Dispatch, by the way, has been carrying my column for about 30-some years.
What's the story on the Creative Syndicate?
Well, the Creative Syndicate represents it was a friendly takeover of the Heritage Features. Heritage Features was a syndicate, and then I think maybe 5, 6, 7 years it was taken over by creators, and Newcomb, Mr. Newcomb, he was the president of Creative Syndicate, and he gives you a lot of degrees of freedom, and he respects writers, and I just enjoy working with him.
Another name association, Malcolm X.
Malcolm X. Actually, during the civil rights movement, Malcolm X was kind of a hero of mine, much more so than Martin Luther King during the civil rights movement, because I was I was quite a radical as a young person, and I was the one that thought that singing "We Shall Overcome" was really not a very, very effective way of gaining civil rights, and I think that I thought that more confrontation was needed.
What made you a radical, and what does that mean?
Well, I think a radical, I'm still a radical today. That is, I believe that a radical is any person who believes in personal liberty and individual freedom and limited government. That makes you a radical. And I've always been a person who believe that people should not interfere with me. I should be able to do my own thing without, so long as I don't violate the rights of other people.
What's the difference between following Malcolm X or following Martin Luther King?
Well, I think Martin Luther, well, at that time, I thought Martin Luther King was too much of a compromiser. I was willing to go, to confront people, to demand things, and my career in the Army was part of that vision of confronting racial discrimination.
How tall are you?
6'5".
And were you that height when you were in the Army?
Oh yes, I was. I was not as heavy. I was in better condition. I was about 185 when I was in the Army.
How did you get into the Army?
I was getting ready to say I was drafted. I much rather say my labor services were confiscated.
When?
In 1959. Matter of fact, I was driving a taxi cab in Philadelphia, And I was making about $300 or $400 a month driving the cab, and I essentially got this letter saying, well, gee, you're going to stop making $300 or $400 a month. You're going to begin to make $68 a month. And so normally people don't switch voluntarily in that direction. So my labor services were being confiscated.
What was the service like for you?
Well, I was, to give you an idea, I was sent to Fort Stewart, Georgia, without a very good orientation on the Southern way of life. And so I had some adjustment problems.
Like?
I did things like I organized the black soldiers to go to the dance on the wrong night. That was, they had separate dances on post. And a matter of fact, I was threatened with court-martial as a result of it, because one of my friends, he asked the white girl to dance, and it started a bit of a ruckus, and MPs were called. And the next morning, the company commander had me in his office for inciting to riot. And I told him, I said, well, it's a military function on a military base, and I was a private, and I was eligible to participate. He said, you know how it is down here. I said, no, sir, I don't know how it is down here. And he would never say that, well, down here there's segregated dancing.
Well, supposedly Harry Truman stopped all that for the military. Who's setting the rules down there in Georgia?
Well, what Harry Truman did, he ended the segregation of forces. That is, there were black units and white units before Harry Truman ended that. But now the units were, they were mixed at the time I was in. That is, black soldiers slept in the same barracks and did went to the same mess hall to eat as white soldiers, and that was not true before.
What was the difference? You mentioned you weren't familiar with the South. I mean, you came out of Philadelphia. What was the difference in the attitude of race in Philadelphia versus Georgia?
Well, it was, to give you an example of it, this was 1959, and when I was going to Fort Stewart, Georgia, I was on the bus, and I remember stopping, I believe, in some town just south of, just as you get into Virginia, and I saw it was Petersburg, I think, Petersburg, Virginia, and the bus stopped, and I woke up, and I saw a sign that said white waiting room and colored waiting room, and that was the first time I was exposed to that, and in Savannah, when we got down to Savannah, I got off the bus to kind of walk around, and I got back on the bus, and there was a lady sitting on my seat. I was sitting right behind the driver because I got on the bus in Philadelphia. There was a white lady sitting in my seat, and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am." And so she said, "Well, this seat is taken." And so I said, "I know it's taken. It's my seat." And so it was a bit of a commotion, but the bus driver came back, and he told the lady, "Well, the boy got on the bus in Philadelphia, and so it's his seat." And the lady started, saying, back in my day, this would never have happened. And to end that particular story, to let you know what kind of person I was, when we got to Hinesville, that's where Fort Stewart is located, the bus was pulling into a stop, and I was standing in the well waiting to get off. And the lady rolled her eyes at me, and I stuck my tongue out at her. And she opened the window of the bus and then told there was a sheriff parked across the street. And he said, "Catch that nigger, catch that nigger." And the sheriff came up to me. He says, "What's wrong?" I said, "I didn't call you, she called you." And so the lady told him that I stuck my tongue out at her. And the sheriff, he just fell out laughing. And he called the MPs, and I was escorted to my new post assignment by MPs. Another name,
John M. Olin.
Well, John M. Olin, a very, very wealthy person, and he's and the Olin Foundation is responsible for the endowed chair that I held for a number of years at George Mason University, and the Olin Foundation is a free market foundation, and at the time it was headed by Bill Simon, the former Secretary of Treasury, I believe under maybe the Ford or Reagan administration, one of the
Nixon administration, I think.
Nixon, I'm not sure.
Maybe it was Ford. But did you ever meet John M. Olin?
No, I didn't. No, I'd never met him.
And how does the endowed chair work, and what did they expect you to do? Did you have to have a certain point of view in order to get that professorship?
I probably had to have a certain point of view. But what they did, what Bill Simon told me, he says, look, the Olin, he was in charge of the Olin Foundation. He says the Olin Foundation, they won't give George Mason $2 or $3 million for as the endowment and let you live off the income. He said, because if we did that, you might die, you might move, go somewhere else, and they'll hire a Marxist in your place, and we couldn't do anything about it because they would have the money. So he says what we do, in effect, is to keep the endowment at the Olin Foundation, and we send you the income each year to the 501c3 based at George Mason University. And so, and he says, all we want from you is an address. And so, as a matter of fact, one of my friends, I was describing my chair to one of my colleagues, and he says, well, that's not really a chair, it's a wheelchair. That is, it goes wherever you go. And so I guess I was a free market person, a free market economist, and they were very, very satisfied with that.
That foundation gave away, I think, something like $375 million, but unlike most foundations, it shut down.
Yes, right. And matter of fact, Bill Simon told me, he said that old man Olin made him promise that that the people that he appointed to the board of directors, that the foundation would not exist beyond the lives of the people that he put in charge. And he said the reason why, he says that there's mission drift. That is, he said that Rockefeller and Ford and maybe Carnegie and Pew, those great men that amassed huge amounts of wealth, they would be rolling in their graves if they knew what the foundation was doing with their money, supporting all kinds of causes, anti-capitalist causes, by the way, that they would never accept. And so Olin thought that a good idea would be for the foundation not to exist, rather than risk this mission drift.
So did the chair dry up then when the foundation shut down? What was it, 2005?
2005. One of the deals they made with the university is that since they paid my salary, my salary plus my secretary and assistants, they paid it for, I guess, maybe around 25 years or so. And so they told the university that when it came to an end, that the university would assume the responsibility for paying me.
So what are you doing now?
Well, I teach, I'm still teaching economics. In the fall, I teach our first PhD microeconomic course. And in the spring, I teach our intermediate microeconomic theory course. And I write columns, I write articles, and I get a book out every now and then.
What have you had, 8 books?
It's 10.
10 books.
Yeah.
All right, another name association, F.A. Hayek.
F.A. Hayek, I think, is one of the great economists of the 20th century. He's the fellow who wrote The Road to Serfdom. He wrote it during, I guess in the middle of about 1946, and he was sending up a warning about the move towards socialism and his threats on liberty. He's written a number of books, The Constitution of Liberty, and he's written a number of papers. And he, along with Milton Friedman and some others, they founded the Mont Pelerin Society, which in 1946, which I'm proud to say I'm a member of, and our society, I think we can boast of. Somewhere between either 8 or 9 Nobel laureate economists around the world who are members of our society.
What does that society do?
Well, what we do, we have meetings in different places around the globe, and we discuss the threats on liberty. We're not politically affiliated. We avoid. News conferences and things like this, although our particular, individual members can do that. But the Mont Pelerin Society is, kind of, I guess, bipartisan, if you want to call that, or we're not publicity seeking.
Thomas Sowell.
Well, I think Thomas Sowell is another great economist of the. Well, he's still alive and still kicking and still writing. Matter of fact, he's written, he just sent me a copy of his 46th or 47th book. But He is a brilliant economist. He's probably done some of the best stuff, best writing on issues having to do with race. But however, while a number of people, excuse me, while a number of people know him about it because of his writings on, excuse me, a number of people know him, are familiar with him because of his writings on race. Some of his greatest work has been the history of economic thought. He's done some of the top writing on people like Sismondi and Jean-Baptiste Say and other economists of the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries.
So if we took a survey of your previous students about you and how you teach, what do you think they'd say about you?
Well, they might say I'm tough. And actually, you can go to, there's a website called ratemyprofessors.com. And students, they make comments there. They point out that I'm demanding, and they like my class.
But how do you, what's demanding about you?
Well, let's say, to give you an idea, the first day of class, I don't do this for the graduate students, but for the undergraduates, they're maybe sophomores and juniors, I tell them the first day of class that this is a real college course. You're going to be required to start sentences off with capital letters, find a subject, an object, and a verb, and you're going to have to do some baby calculus. And I tell them the first day of class, if this is too much, if you're looking for a Mickey course, then nothing's wrong with wanting a Mickey course, but you're in the wrong room. What do you want
them to learn? Well, the broad picture.
Well, I tell the graduate students and the undergraduate students, the economics more than anything else, I think it's a way of thinking. It's a way of reasoning. It's deductive logic, and I want them to be able to apply economics to everyday occurrences, to be able to think systematically and logically, and I think that's the job of an economics professor.
But when did they discover that you're tough?
Well, I think that to give you an idea, for my class this spring, this semester, it starts at 7:30 in the morning, and so getting up at 7:30 is character building, and so I get students who at least have enough stick-to-itiveness to get up consistently at 7:30. And I tell the students the first day of class, I say, look, this is the class starts at 7:30. Even the cold days of winter, it starts at 7:30 when it's snowing, and it starts at 7:30 on nice days in May and April when you much rather lay in bed. And so I tell them these are the requirements. And then also I give unannounced quizzes. That is about 5 or 6 unannounced quizzes, and I tell the students at the beginning of the semester, each day you come to class, you're to bring a number 2 pencil and a Scantron, because you never know when you're going to get a quiz. And then my midterms are essays, and that's why I tell them that you have to learn how to read and write and spell and practice writing legibly.
If you were to define your political economic philosophy in a paragraph, what would it be?
That's pretty challenging. I would say that my political philosophy is very, very much like my economics philosophy. It's laissez-faire. That is, people have the right to do whatever they wish so long as they don't violate the property rights of others. And my thinking about many, many issues, my initial premise that I make is that I own Walter Williams. I am the property of Walter Williams. You are the property of Brian Lamb. And so what that means, when you start off with the idea of self-ownership, well, then there are certain things that are clearly immoral. And the reason why they're immoral, because they violate private property. That is, the reason why murder is immoral is because it violates private property. Rape is immoral. It violates private property. Theft is immoral. It violates private property. And many Americans can go along with this, but I say something else violates private property that many Americans would not agree with me. That is, I think that the forcible use of one person to serve the purposes of another, it violates private property, because keep in mind, a working definition of slavery is in fact the forcible use of one person to serve the purpose of another. And if you look at all these the government spending in our country, that Americans are being forcibly used to serve the purpose of another. That is, your money is being taken by, under intimidation, threats, and coercion to serve the purposes of some other American. I think that's immoral.
Can you remember when you started to really feel strongly about this?
I don't remember, but I think maybe it was like in the 60s or in the 70s, because in my younger days I was I think I was far more liberal, if you want to use that term, of and thinking that government should play a bigger role than I think government should play now. So I think that maybe when I started going to graduate school at UCLA or finishing up my undergraduate work, I started asking questions.
Do you know why you did? I mean, do you remember anything happening in your life
No, I can't think of anything. I just think I became exposed to the writings of people like Frederick Bastiat and Hayek, and I had some very tenacious mentors at UCLA that just would not tolerate nonsensical statements. For example, I was a supporter of the minimum wages, and so I had a professor at UCLA ask me, well, are you more concerned about the intentions behind the minimum wage law or the effects of the minimum wage law? And so he said, well, why don't you read some stuff by Milton Friedman and Yale Brosen? And so I became convinced that the effects of the minimum wage law were very, very counterproductive to low-skilled people.
I wrote down a quote of yours I found, evaluate the effects of public policy as opposed to intentions, which is basically what you've been saying.
That's right. And I think that to come up with compassionate policy requires that we engage in dispassionate analysis, that we separate ourselves away from compassion, because if we become compassionate in our analysis, well, then we're going to wind up with a dispassionate policy.
I've read that you like greed.
Oh yes, when I say greed, I'm not talking about. Let me go back. I think greed. If you ask the question, what's that human motivation that gets the most wonderful things done? I would say greed. Now, I'm not talking about misrepresentation, fraud, stealing, and other kinds of immoral acts. I'm talking about people trying to get as much as they can for themselves. And if you ask the question, maybe the article that you might have read, if you ask the question, well, look, this last winter, you had Texas cattle ranchers getting up in the dead of night, running out feeding stray cows, trying to take care of stray cows, making this huge personal sacrifice to make sure New Yorkers have beef on their shelves. You had this summer, you'll have Idaho potato farmers getting up in the morning doing backbreaking work, sun beating down on them, bugs biting them, dirt underneath their fingernails, making this personal sacrifice to make sure New Yorkers also have potatoes. Now, the question I would ask, do you think that they're doing this because they love New Yorkers? No, they're doing it because they love themselves. That is, they want more for themselves. Now, in a free market, the way that you get more for yourself is to serve your fellow man, to make your fellow man happier, to cater to his needs and his desires. Now, if you ask the question, how much beef and potatoes do you think New Yorkers would have if it all depended on human love and kindness? I'd be worried about New Yorkers.
When you write a column, what's the most successful? What grabs their attention, and how often do you do that when you find that out?
I don't think of it in that term. I'm watching the news, or I'm talking to somebody, or I get an idea and I write about it. Matter of fact, some of my columns some years ago, it's less so now, the thinking for my column was formed while I was out on my bike, maybe going up a very, very steep hill and your muscles and your legs are burning and you want to think about something else. And I'm kind of composing a column when I'm out on my bike.
How often do you bike?
I don't bike as much as I used to. Matter of fact, between April and November, for many, many years, I used to bike maybe 2,000, 2,300 miles during a year. And the reason why it's April to November, October is because it's not as cold, and I biked on the road. But now I bike maybe once or twice a week, and not in the winter.
Do you bike long distances, or are these back and
No,
forth?
no, it's not long distance. It's maybe about 20 miles, 25 miles round trip.
We've got a number of places that people can find your column, and we'll put it on the screen. And there's townhall.com, jewishworldreview.com, worldnewsdaily.com, and there's libertypenblog.com.
And then there's also my webpage, walterewilliams.com.
And where do you, can you remember the column that got the most attention, or one of them? That's always a tough question. And why do you think?
Well, recently the columns that bring in the most attention and some of the uglier mail is when I talk about Social Security and Medicare, or government programs for the elderly. And matter of fact, I think that there's no constitutional authority for Social Security. I think it's unconstitutional in the first place, but I think it's a bad deal as well. And the reason why I think it's a bad deal is because the rate of return is very, very low. But it turns out that some people benefit immensely from Social Security. That is, according to statistics, a person who started drawing Social Security in 1980, he gets all that he ever put into Social Security plus interest out in 2.8 years. The person entering the labor force in 1980, he'll have to live until he's 92 to break even with Social Security. So I think that, and I point this out in my columns, that Social Security and Medicare is a perverse form of income redistribution from people who have less money to people who have more money. People over 65 have the highest net worth among any other age group in our country, and I believe close to 70% of them own their homes outright. You cannot find any other age group having that kind of net worth or actually own their houses. So you say, well, how much sense or how just is it to take money from a 25-year-old through the tax code or 30-year-old to subsidize somebody who is far more wealthy than he is?
I want to show you something you said in 1991 at a Citizens for Sound Economy session here in Washington, D.C.
I think we all recognize that we've had one balanced budget in the United States in 34 years. And I believe in 28 of those years that we've had some kind of tax increase, and very often the justification was to balance the budget. We even had the 1978 Balanced Budget Act signed through Congress. Now, with all this evidence, I don't think that it's being too unkind on my behalf to suggest that we have a Congress that is a bunch of liars and hustlers and exploiters of public ignorance.
Liars and hustlers?
I don't think much has changed since then.
What do you mean?
Well, yeah. Well, they say, well, we're having this tax increase to balance the budget. Well, where's the balanced budget? I think that the Congress misleads the American people on let's say the recent unemployment statistics, where the Congress and the president say, well, look, we're unemployment is going down, when they fail to include the people who have just dropped out of the labor market. And a lot of people say, well, look, if you look at real unemployment statistics, you might be talking about 15% rather than 8%.
What are the chances that a balanced budget doesn't mean anything.
Well, I think that no, a balanced budget a balanced budget doesn't really protect us, because look, right now the federal government spends out of our GDP close to $4 trillion a year. Okay, now our GDP is like 15 trillion. Well, the federal government could spend $10 trillion and tax us $10 trillion. We'd have a balanced budget, but how free would we be? And so the true issue, I think the issue having to do with our liberty, is federal spending. Not what the taxes are, but what federal spending is. That is, and keep in mind that for most of our history, from 1787 into 1920, the federal government was no more than 3% of the GDP, except during wartime. Today, the federal government is somewhere between 25 to 30% of the GDP.
Here you are in 1988, in the middle of, let's see, leading up to, or no, you're still in the middle of the Ronald Reagan, or the end of the Ronald Reagan term. Let's watch.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that the Reagan administration has not delivered on its campaign promises. Things like dismantling the Department of Education, getting rid of the Department of Energy, cutting down government spending. Clearly, government spending is far more than it was when Reagan took office. Taxes are greater than. So in terms of performance, in terms of delivering on campaign promises in 1980, I think that it is indeed a failure in that sense. Now, it's a success in another sense, namely that I think that the level of debate has been raised in our country on a whole range of issues. A key one is the legitimate role of government in a free society.
That was a call-in show here, middle of the end of the Reagan administration. What's your reaction when you hear that today?
Well, I don't, there's not much to change. I think that we still need to ask, well, or settle, what is the legitimate role of government in a free society? And a legitimate role of government in a free society is not that of government taking what belongs to one American and giving it to another American to whom it does not belong.
Have you ever, in your lifetime of writing and all that, known a president to keep his promise?
No, I don't. And you can't fully blame this on a president. That is, and I suggest to people that you can't blame the problems that we face fully on politicians, because politicians, you can blame them a little bit for violating their oath of office, but politicians are doing precisely what the American people elect them to office to do. And what do the American people elect politicians to office to do? They elect them to office to use the power of their office to take what belongs to one American and bring it back to them. That is, they want politicians to do for them what if they did this identical thing privately, they would go to jail. That is, if I took your money to help some elderly person or some poor person, if I took it by force today and help somebody, I would go to jail.
Why didn't the public hold these elected officials accountable?
Well, because they're doing what the public wants them to do. That, imagine. Some of the viewers might be upset about this, but imagine this. Imagine I'm running for the United States Senate from, let's say, North Carolina, any state. And I go back and forth across the state, and I tell my fellow North Carolinians, look, if you elect me, I've read the United States Constitution. If you elect me to office, don't expect for me to bring back aid to higher education, highway construction funds, other public projects, Meals on Wheels, senior citizen prescription drugs, because it's not in the Constitution. It's not in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. Well, do you think I would get elected to the Senate from North Carolina? No, I would not, because I would not be doing what North Carolinians would want me to do, and that is use the power of my office to take what belongs to one person and bring it back to the people in North Carolina. Now, here's the tragedy for our country, is that North Carolinians would be acting absolutely correctly in terms of their own interest. The reason why is that because if I, as Senator Williams, don't bring back these goodies, it doesn't mean that North Carolinians will pay a lower federal income tax. All that it means is that it will go to South Carolina instead. That is, once legalized theft begins, it pays for everybody to participate, and those who don't participate, they'll wind up holding the brown end of the stick, if you will.
Here you are in 1995 talking about the debt ceiling.
You know, when you look at bond markets or stock markets, they are future oriented. And so if the market, when we have this debate in Congress, if the market perceives that we're going to get our deficit and spending under control, well, then it's just as easy for the bond market to shoot up and the long-term bond market to go up. However, if we focus on the crisis, the immediate crisis, and just kind of give away all the spending programs and not really cope with the deficit, the bond market can go down because it says, well, look, these guys aren't serious about the future.
In 1995, our debt was 5.5 trillion, and today it's 14.3, and that's probably higher than that. Mm-hmm. Can you? How far can we go with this debt?
I think there is a limit. I think one of the things that has happened to serve us very well is that our country has been maybe the most stable country in the world, and people are willing to buy our debt. That is, the Chinese and the Japanese and other people, they're willing to pick up these treasury instruments.
Let me put on the screen so you can see it, the exact numbers as of the end of December. There's mainland China at 1.1 trillion, own 23% of our foreign debt. Japan's up 1 trillion, United Kingdom 415 million, oil exporters 234 billion. All this is trillion or billion, and Brazil 207 billion. What do you see there?
Well, if they weren't buying our debt, if they weren't, we'd be in deep trouble.
Why are they buying it?
Well, because where else can they put their money? That is, the United States so far has been a fairly safe place for people to put their money, and so they're not going to buy bonds from Greece or Portugal or Spain or England or many other countries that have relatively unstable economies and relatively or politically unstable.
But from what you know about economics, though, how far can this go?
Well, there is a limit. There is a limit, and you know what a lot of people don't realize is that our country can become just like Greece. I mean, and if you look at the numbers, the per capita debt in the United States right now is around $45 million for each American. And in Greece, it's somewhere around $42 million. And so I think that as government gets larger and larger, we're going to be less able to take care of our debt. And what's going to happen is that the government is just going to repudiate the debt. There's no way in the world that we're going to be able to pay $14, $15, $16 trillion in debt. We're going to repudiate it, and one way that nations typically repudiate debt is by inflating the currency.
When you're teaching, how often do you see your students change their attitude about anything from the beginning of the course to the end?
Well, actually, the kind of conversations that we're having now, or the subjects of my syndicated columns, they never appear in my classroom.
Why not?
Well, because I think that it's dishonest, academically dishonest for a professor to use his classroom to proselytize students. And that matter of fact, I tell the students the first day of class that this is an economics course, and that we're going to talk about positive economics, not my values and not your values, because I think that giving students my values is academically dishonest. Now, however, I think that students will come to share my values. All they need to do is know how to think rigorously. And if they know how to think rigorously, they're going to share the same values that I have.
Now, the man that you often pinch hit for, Rush Limbaugh, doesn't think much of academia.
And I don't blame him.
Why?
Because a lot of academics live a very, very charmed life. They are underworked and overpaid for the most part.
But yourself?
And that includes me as well. That is, but I think I do a fairly good job. And then on top of it, most of my money for a number of years has come from the Olin Foundation as opposed to the taxpayers. But I think that academics leave a lot to be desired. That is, they have a vision of the world that they think is superior to their fellow man, and they think that one of their jobs is to be able to use government to impose that vision on others. And then if you ask the question, people say, well, gee, academics are smart, or this politician is smart. He's smarter than that one. Being smart does not carry a lot of weight with me, because I think that the world has been messed up by smart people. Dumb people have not messed up anything in this world that I can think of. It's been smart people.
You speak about organ donorship. This is from, 1999, the Independent Institute at Oakland, California.
I believe people have the right to sell their organs. I believe that people should have the right to bequeath their organs to their heirs. Matter of fact, my doctor, some years ago, he was trying to get me to stop smoking. And so I told him, I said, what sense does it make to put pink lungs in the ground? I told him that when you die, you should go out in the Big Bang. That's the optimal way. That is, everything should be wrong with you. Because, and you kind of feel sorry for the guy who died with just one thing, a heart attack. Because his liver is good, it means that he did not drink enough. Lungs are good, he did not smoke enough. Now, I was telling my doctor, I said, now, if I could sell my organs, if I could bequeath my organs, let's say to my daughter, I would have incentive to take better care of them.
Why can't we sell our organs?
I don't know. That is, I think that it's a violation of private property rights. That is, if my test of whether I own something is whether I can sell it. And now, if the Congress owned my organs, well, then it makes sense. I don't have the right to sell them because they belong to somebody else. But if I own my organs, I think I have the right to sell them. And I believe that having a market for organs would be very, very good for people who need it. That is, there are a huge list of people on the organ transplant list that are not being served because people cannot sell their organs.
But you can give them away.
Yeah, you can give them away, but there's I can just imagine. Here I am laying in the hospital, dying, and the doctor asked my daughter, well, can we have his organs? Can we have his liver? And she might be crying and very upset and saying, I want my daddy to be buried just like he came in this world with everything that belongs to him. But if the doctor said, well, we'll give you $100,000 for his liver, she'll say, yeah, you can have the liver and you can have the eyes, whatever you want. It would create incentive for people to give their organs or to take care of their organs as well.
Where is your daughter today?
She is. I don't think I want to talk about it on the show, but she's doing very well. She's a teacher and she's taking graduate courses.
How old is she?
She is 37. My wife and we had children late. I don't look like it, but I've been alive 1/3 of the time our country has been in existence. So. But I hold it very well. But my wife, who's now deceased, we were married 14 years before my daughter was born.
When did your wife die?
She died in 2007.
What was she like?
Oh, she was a charming lady. She was the person that civilized me. I was not as nice a person before I met her.
Where did you meet her?
I met her in Philadelphia when I was driving a taxi. And it turned out that a bunch of drivers and their girlfriends used to get together after work, after our shift was over. And I met her on one of the times when the guys got together.
Why do you feel you were less civilized back when you were driving that taxi?
Well, imagine it for her. for one reason. When we first got married, we moved to Los Angeles, and my wife is she's a very, very popular lady, good-looking lady as well. And so we used to get invited to parties, and we used to come home after the party, and she used to say to me while we're in bed, she'd say, did you have to say that to a person? Or do you always have to prove that you're smarter than other people? And other things like that. You know, it was civilizing, you know. And so I got a lot of lessons from her. And then on top of it, she was a great partner. She shared a vision. We both grew up poor in North Philadelphia. And we both shared a vision that we just wanted much more, and she cooperated.
Are you, by the way, how long was the marriage?
48 years. And we were together for a half century.
Do you feel any different today now that you're no longer poor in your mentally? I mean, are people better off if they have more money?
By all means. And I think that my wife, before she passed away, we were just kind of complimenting ourselves that we were sitting at a table and saying, well, gee, isn't that really wonderful that when we can say we don't need money anymore? We're not super rich, but we're, you know, for the first time in our lives, you know, we just had everything that we wanted, and we are in no debt. And that's one of the old-fashioned things about us, is that when we walked out of and later on in our years, when we walked out of a car sales room, we owned the car. We paid off our houses, not cash, but we paid them off, you know, doubling up on mortgage, and we just, you know, I'm part of the era that believed that to be in debt was not really a great moral thing. But today, you know, being in debt is no problem to people.
By the way, how did the smoking go?
Well, I think it's this will be the 4th year without smoking.
Do you have a hard time stopping?
I tried a number of times, but it turns out that I took Chantix, and that worked out very well. It's a blocker. It blocks the part of your brain that makes you feel good from smoking.
That's the one that the ad that spends half its time telling you your arm might fall off, your eyes will go bad. Or
right, yeah.
Anyway, one more clip from the past. This is 1992.
Mm-hmm.
Are cities supposed to be in the business of building convention centers, which are losing propositions no matter where they're built? Are they supposed to be in the business of feeding homeless people that I think are more accurately described as bums and parasites? Are cities supposed to be in the business of urban renewal? Some people call it urban removal. Are they supposed to be in the business of issuing condoms in high schools? Well, cities are doing all these kind of things that I don't think they're supposed to be doing. And as my grandmother used to say to me, she says, well, you know, if you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, you're not going to be able to do those things you're supposed to be doing.
Well, I think I'm still right. I mean, that if you look at some of the things that cities have traditionally done, namely protect people, produce law and order, maybe provide public education to the extent that you thought cities ought to be involved in public education. Well, those kind of things that cities were supposed to be doing are not being done very well. Washington, D.C. is a classic example of rotten schools and unsafe streets. Many other cities are in the same straits. And so, and again, the kind of quoting my grandmother, when you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, participating in drug programs, condoms, and pregnancy, and all these other things that cities are involved in doing, you can't do what you're supposed to be doing.
What can you tell us about your grandmother?
She was a wonderful lady. Matter of fact, her mother and father were slaves, and she used to talk about the kind of things they told her about slavery. And she grew up in Newport News, Virginia, and she was very, very proud of me. And one of the reasons she was proud of me as my youth, because I accomplished a number of things. As a matter of fact, I was the first person in our entire family to graduate from high school, and she just felt so very, very proud of that.
And where did you come in contact with her the most? And which side was she on? Mother?
Oh, she was on my mother's side, yeah.
And where did she live?
She lived in a housing project down the street from us, in the Richard Allen Housing Project in North Philadelphia. And one of the reasons, I was one of her favorites, and sometimes my mother would force me out of the house with no breakfast. And the reason why is that I was supposed to get my breakfast, but I was involved in teasing my sister, and my mother just would not allow my sister in the house to be in the house alone, and so I was forced to leave when she went to work. She did days work, and so I used to go down to my grandmother's house and tell her that my mother didn't give me any breakfast.
Did she feed you?
Oh yes, she fed me royally, and then she fussed with my mother.
We talked a bit about your daughter. Do you have other children?
No, just one daughter. Yeah. Well, I wanted. My wife did not want any children because she's the youngest of 9, and I wanted about 5, and so we settled with 1.
So, how long are you going to teach?
Well, I'm going to teach until I can. I'm going to teach as long as I can maintain my mental faculties.
Have you missed anything?
In what sense?
Things you wanted to do in your life besides write a column and write books and speak and be a professor and pinch hit for Rush Limbaugh on his radio show.
No, I don't think I missed anything. And as I used to tell my wife, the day I die, I want to have taught that morning. I mean, I love teaching, and I don't see myself retiring. I think I've led the charmed life in the following way: is that I am happy doing everything that I do. I look forward to doing what I'm doing. And like around August or late part of July, I begin to get lonesome for the students. And so I'm looking forward to classes beginning.
And year round, where do you live? George Mason's here in our suburbs. Where do you live most of the time?
Yeah, my primary residence is in my opinion, a far more patriotic part of our country, namely in Valley Forge.
And why do you do that and commute?
Well, I was teaching at Temple University, and I took a job at George Mason University. And the thing about George Mason University is that they were a free market department, and people leave me alone, and I like my colleagues. And actually, we've developed since I've been there, since 1980, a very, very distinguished department. We have 2 Nobel laureates on our faculty. One is James Buchanan, who won the Nobel Prize in 1986, and while I was chairman, I hired our second one, Vernon Smith, who he was on our faculty for a year and a half before he won the Nobel Prize, and I think it's 2002, 2002, yeah.
So when's the next time we can hear you for 3 hours on the Rush Limbaugh show?
I don't know. Whenever they decide to give me a call. Most times I can make it, but sometimes we can't get our schedule together.
Where do you do it when you do it?
I do it from New York, even though I've done it a couple times out of Washington, D.C., but I like doing New York because I have a staff at my disposal. They can help me, and then I can actually see the engineer, and being able to see the engineer and the call screener makes a difference.
Dr. Walter Williams, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at qna.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.